All right, cool. I sent out the study guide to you guys via email, so hopefully you got that. What we're gonna do is just work through that study guide. Um, what I did in yesterday's study guide review, I allowed students to answer questions using theoretical frameworks. I posed some midterm questions from previous midterms just so you guys could see how the question looks and sounds and what I'm looking for. If we need to, I could do that again. If not, no need. But it's really about getting through that study guide and giving you guys time to answer any question that you have about the journals and or the midterm. So that will be the goal of today. I'm gonna share my screen. I'll put the study guide up. We'll work through that. Give me 1 second. And then again, we'll once we get through the study guide, we'll spend the rest of the time just addressing any questions that you guys may have. Uh, so as we work through this, don't hesitate to stop me or if you guys have a question, because remember, I won't be able to see all of you. Um, Actually, give me a second. I want to pull up another one. There we go. All right. Okay. So if we think back to how we started the course, I posed the question. Well, we ran through the lecture of how old African people are, kind of dealing with the subject matter that we'll be engaging in this conversation or this class in Pan African Studies, right? So we need to know who are African people. So one, how old are African people? There's three acceptable answers for that question. One is 8 million years old. Two is unknown. Unknown is acceptable because the further that they dig, older African people get. So unknown is an acceptable answer. The third answer would be 7 million years old. So if I were to ask you guys on the test how old are African people, your answers that would be either 8 million years, 7 million years, or unknown because the deeper that they dig, the older African people get. I mentioned in that lecture that Lucy, who is widely recognized as the oldest remains found in Ethiopia, that was traced back 3.2 million years, but again, they found older remnants of 7 million years old. Modern human, what we know as Homo sapien, that was originally traced back 200,000 years in East Africa. New information is citing 340,000 years out of Cameroon. And then the first large migration of Africans leaving Africa is about 60,000 years ago. So I also posed the question, who were some Africans prior to European contact? Here's a list of them there. We have Narmer, Kemetic pharaoh of the early dynastic period. He was able to unify Upper and Lower Egypt. Imhotep, the world's first multi-genius. He's an architect, physician, engineer. He built the step pyramids. He's also recognized as a priest, sage, poet, scribe, and astrologer. Akhenaten, pharaoh of the 18th dynasty in Kemet. He ruled about 17 years, roughly between 1336 BCE or 1334 BCE. And he was responsible for transitioning Kemet from a polytheistic society, which is the belief in many gods, into a monotheistic society, the belief of one god, and that was Aten. Taharka, a great Kemetic pharaoh, also a great military strategist, was able to push the Kemetic Empire into Europe, also as far as Spain. We have Mansa Musa, the greatest, the wealthiest man on earth, um, amassing about $400 billion worth of wealth. He was able to build universities, schools, and mosques. Most famous, the University of Senghor. At his reign, Mali had around at least 400 cities. So these are the theoretical frameworks. We're going to take some time with these because we cover them in passing throughout the semester, but I want to really sit down and kind of pin this down for you guys so you have an understanding. Because what's going to happen in the test, you have 5 questions. You only have to answer 3 of the 5 questions, but for each answer, you have to use a theoretical framework. So if you think back to the lecture that I just covered in regards to how old are African peoples before European contact, I said that that lecture was grounded in an African American male theory framework. So also I want to point out this distinction for you. African American male theory, that's the theory. Okay, and you notice you have theory here in the brackets, right? African American male theory is the theory, but the framework that African American male theory posits is that African American boys, and I'll include boys, women as well, are resilient and resistant, that African people are born with an innate desire for self-determination and with an unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence. So those are the frameworks, right? They're resistant and resilient African people. African people are born with an innate desire for self-determination and an unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence. That's the framework that the theory African American male theory articulates. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So same with this one, right? The theory is critical race theory, CTR. Yet the framework that we're using, especially with critical race theory, because critical race theory has like several frameworks, right? At least 9. But the one that we've covered in our class is counter storytelling. So the framework is counter storytelling. And what counter storytelling does, opposed to focusing on the narratives of dominant culture, i.e., Euro Americans, the focus is placed on the storytelling of the narratives from the perspective of those who are marginalized by the dominant culture. Culturally responsive teaching models are examples of counter storytelling in academic practice, retelling with great emphasis the histories of people of color or culture that often go ignored. So if you think about how we engage history in this class, history is engaged from a counter storytelling perspective in this course, right? If I were to talk about the discovery of America, I'm not going to talk about Columbus. I'm going to talk about the indigenous people who were already here, right? So that's a counter storytelling approach to looking at the discovery of America. Do you guys understand how the frameworks of African American male theory and critical race theory counter storytelling, how those frameworks work or what those frameworks are intended to do? So there's no questions about these two particular frameworks? Okay, we'll move on to the third one. This one should be a little bit more familiar with you guys. We kind of dealt with this a little bit more, but the frameworks of funds of knowledge speaks to the importance of the family unit and community structure in these communities, recognizing the power in the community forms of knowledge, engaging in thinking that moves funds of knowledge into more historical forms of social capital. So again, the sponge of knowledge can be thought of is your abuela's tortilla recipe, right? Your grandmother passing down her records to you, right? These are knowledge that is important within your community that may not get recognized within dominant society, but they are important for that community to maintain itself. So this notion of funds of knowledge. Folklore is considered funds of knowledge, right? This notion of fugitivity. When you think about Frederick Douglass, he performed a fugitivity because he stole himself from the enslavement plantation, right? And he went on a tour to promote the inhumaneness of the slave institution, right? So fugitivity is the act of stealing oneself, the state of constant flight from captivity. And that constant flight becomes important, right? Because when you are considered to be enslaved, you're considered the property of the plantation. So at the moment that you leave that plantation, you become a fugitive, right? But if we understand how the plantation works, they're sending the dogs after you, they're sending the patty rollers after you to get you back into that plantation. So your flight, your state of fleeing is constant, right? So fugitivity is complemented by maroonage. So maroonage is the process of extracting oneself from slavery, right? And that's just fugitivity, the process of extracting oneself from slavery, right? But then this is also relating to the groups of runaway Africans who became maroons in the swamps of the southern states, also in like Jamaica and parts of the Caribbean. So maroonage is the ability to free yourself and then set up a free community somewhere where you're safe. So these are the frameworks: fugitivity and maroonage. Now, to show you and provide to you an example of how these frameworks will work to answer a question, okay? So if I were to pose the question, so let's say, for example, the question on the essay or on the midterm is, how old are African people? What is a significant individual prior to European contact? And why does that information become important, right? So this is the question that I'm going to answer. So how I would use a framework, it would sound like this. From an African American male theory framework that states African people are resilient in resistance with an innate capacity for self-determination and morality and intelligence, African people can be traced back 8 million years old. A significant African individual prior to European contact is Imhotep, as he was the first physician, the first multi-genius, the first architect. This information becomes important from an African American male theory framework because this situates the innate brilliance within African people and their capacity for morality and intelligence, right? So that's me answering every component of the question, and I'm answering this question through the framework of African American male theory. So that's how the question should kind of sound and play out in your head, right? Is there any questions about the theoretical framework? So I'll say this: my third year teaching, every time that I give a midterm, points are always lost because people forget to use the theoretical framework. So I can't overemphasize enough how important this is. I don't know if people are not using it because they forgot or because they're not understanding what the theoretical framework is. I'm not sure, but people do very well. But the only time points are docked is because they're not using these theoretical frameworks. So I'm giving you the opportunity to kind of answer any questions you may have about that. So take advantage of it. You guys are all good with the theoretical framework.
Hold on, Professor. I had a question.
Sure.
So when doing the midterm, we have to use the theoretical framework, kind of like in the, to rephrase the question and then answer the question.
Not necessarily to rephrase the question, right? But you're gonna work through those frameworks to answer your question, right?
Okay.
Because I phrased it like that just to make it very explicit so you can see what I'm talking about, right? To make it over obvious. You don't have to say XYZ like I did. But I mean, if you want to, I'll make it easier for me to grade it because I know where your theoretical framework is. That's not a bad thing. But I'm just saying you don't have to do that. Long as you are working through that framework. So as long as when you think about African people and addressing that question, and you're using the theory of African American male theory, somewhere within your answer, you're talking about them being self-determined, moral, intelligent, right? Having an innate desire for these things. So that's what I'm more so looking for. If you're using critical race theory counter storytelling as a framework, then I'm looking for you to answer the question in a way that does not go into the dominant story of history, right? You have to use that counter narrative to answer that question. Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yeah, because so for like the first one, how old can Africans be traced back? So I'd put 8 million years ago, and then I'd put in some theoretical framework of the African male theory, right?
Right. But you want to show how they connect. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Because you would use that because typically when we talk about African history, you don't talk about the self determination, right? You don't talk about the morality or the intelligence, nor do you talk about how old African people can be traced back. So you want to make sure that they kind of connect to each other. Does that make
Okay.
sense? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
hmm Any other questions about the frameworks? Okay. So we'll move on to the readings, and then if you guys have questions later, just shoot me an email, shoot me a text. Um, the readings I'm going to pick up with. I know we had some readings prior to getting into the glissant, but I'm not going to really deal with that too much on the midterm. We'll jump right into, as far as the readings are concerned, right into glissant. What I did on the study guide is I posed questions that will help you get a good understanding of the reading. And if you can answer these questions, you should be fine answering any questions about this text on the midterm. So, how does the juxtaposition of the written and the oral manifest according to glissant? Think about the opening page of the open boat. Think about the little end note on the bottom of the page. It directly addresses this question. Um, Fix that. Why is the open boat symbolic? What is Glissant provoking his readers to envision? What is the significance of the belly of the boat being pregnant? We discussed this pretty thoroughly. So think back to that conversation. Think back to what you wrote in your notes or your journal. If you need to, you can revisit the lecture that's posted online as well. The three metamorphoses of abyss, we talked about that quite a bit as well. And then why is Glissant attentive to relations? Why does that become important for Glissant? So if you can answer these questions as it pertains to the open boat reading, you should be good to go. And then we have Cesaire's Discourse on Colonialism. How does Cesaire utilize Hitler in his argument against colonialism? Is this approach effective or ineffective? And we talked about his use of Hitler. According to Cesaire, what does colonialism do to the colonizer? How does this relate to the boomerang effect of colonialism? So just think about how a boomerang, if you throw it back, right? If you throw it, it'll come back to you. Cesaire argues that as colonialism seeks to throw out inhumane actions, right, is making them inhumane themselves. How does Cesaire articulate colonialism leading to thingification? And he has a very specific line that addresses that. And then what is the thesis of discourse? And what is the methodological approach utilized by Cesaire? Do you deem his method effective? So one, think about what a discourse is. That will give you the answer to what his methodological approach is, right? So if you were to look up what discourse is, then you'll know what the answer to the method is. I also spoke about this in the lecture on this text as well. So you can either refer back to the recordings or just look up discourse, and that should give you a good idea of what the method is, and you should know what the thesis is based on your journal. So we have Gomez reversing Sale. How does Gomez problematize the notion of freedom for newly emancipated Africans? What are some of the ways this freedom was subverted? And remember, subvert means just to undermine, right? By former slaveholders and those who sought to maintain the slave society. So think about black codes. Think about not indentured servitudes, but sharecropping, things of that nature. Okay. What is the significance of the Freedmen's Bureau and their attempts to develop education for newly emancipated Africans? How is the significance problematized by course lectures? So remember in the reading, he talks about how the Freedmen's Bureau came into the South attempting to establish schools and organizations for education for the newly freed Africans, right? And I said, while there's some truth to that, African people were already establishing schools, right? Our African people already had systems of education in place prior to the Freedmen's Bureau coming down to the South. So that is how I problematize that notion in the course lecture, okay? And if you need to, I would suggest going back to watch that lecture. And then we have the notion of 40 acres and a mule. How does that notion play into contemporary conversations around race relations? So think about that correlation that was spoke of pretty explicitly in the course lecture as well. 40 acres and a mule was what the enslaved Africans were afforded once they were emancipated, which they never received, right? It was a form of reparations, which speaks to contemporary conversations around race relations. And then we have The Souls of Black Folks, W.E.B. Du Bois. And think about how he starts off the essay, right? And this is where this question is pulled from, how he starts off that chapter. What is the real question Du Bois is attentive to that is often danced around or asked in a half-hearted way? How does Du Bois deal or respond to this question, right? And he says, to the real question, I seldom answer a word or I turn the boil down to a simmer, right? So that kind of gives you some insight to how he responds to the question. Think back to what the real question is. You could find that in the text or on the lecture that was provided. What is the work Du Bois is doing with the veil? What is it symbolic of? And what distinctions does it draw, right? So the veil is separating something. What is the veil separating? And that's the distinction that I'm looking for you to be attentive to. What is Du Bois's definition of double consciousness? How does this double consciousness manifest itself in the contemporary society? Um, that could be thought of as code switching, right? And that's how we can link double consciousness to our contemporary society. What is significant about the title of the chapter, which is Of Our Spiritual Strivings? What does Du Bois argue the Negro is striving for? Right, and that's also located within the text. It's a very explicit passage that he mentions that I go over in quite detail in the lecture. Okay, and then the last reading for the semester so far was Douglas and the speech that he gave on the American Constitution and the slave. And so the question we pose, how does Douglas articulate what the Constitution is? What are some of the characteristics he attributes to the Constitution? So he has like a long paragraph where he articulates what the Constitution is and what the Constitution is not. You'll find your answer to that question in that very long paragraph. And I spent a great deal of time on that paragraph in the course lecture. So, why is it important for Douglas that readers of the Constitution are not concerned with the actions and behaviors of those who wrote the Constitution, right? So think about how he says, 100 years from now, people who are reading the Constitution are not going to be concerned with the actions and the intentions of the writers of the Constitution, right? Think about how we know while Thomas Jefferson was writing the Constitution, he had enslaved Africans himself, right? And think about the contradiction at play there. How does Douglas problematize the interpretation of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that was provided by the individual who gave a speech on the Constitution prior to Douglas? So when you think about that reading, we know that a portion of Douglas's speech is in response to someone else's speech that was given prior to him, right? And we know in that speech, we know in that speech, the individual who gave the speech prior to Douglas, he picks out certain articles of the Constitution and tries to define them. In Douglas's speech, he says that he inaccurately defines those articles, and Douglas gives his own definition. One of those being Article 1, Section 8, right? So, what is the definition that Douglas provides of that portion of the Constitution? And then, what is the significance of the Rhode Island 9 p.m. Lantern Act? What is it providing an example of, right? So remember, this is the story where in Rhode Island, if you were black after 9 p.m., you had to come out with a lantern. They came out with just the lanterns. They were arrested, taken to court, and they were found not guilty because the law did not say they needed to have a candle. So then they changed the law to make sure you had a candle. They come out after 9 p.m. with their candle, with their lantern, but the candle was not lit. They get arrested, they go to jail, they go to trial. They're deemed not guilty because the law does not say that the candle must be lit. They change the law. The law now says you must have a lantern, a candle, and the candle must be lit. So they come back and they do all those things. And Douglas responds with, if I had been there, I would come out with a lantern, a candle that's lit, but I would paint the glass on my lantern black. Right? So this speaks to a certain type of act, a certain type of undermining, and I'm looking for you to be able to articulate what that is. So those are the readings. Is there any questions about the frameworks, about the readings, about anything that we've covered or mentioned so far? Would you guys want to situate frameworks within the reading? So, for example, glissant, would you situate that within African American male theory? Would you situate that within counter storytelling? Would you situate that within funds of knowledge? That would be an exercise to help you guys kind of get a better understanding of how the theoretical frameworks work as it pertains to the readings. If you want, we could do that. If not, we don't have to. I just want to make sure that you're understanding what these things are.
Wait, so you're giving us the option to like help us?
Yeah, so like, if you want, we could go through each reading and we could locate which theoretical framework you feel fits best within the reading.
Yeah, can we do that, please?
Yeah. So let's start with the Poetics of Relation, the open book text by Glissant. So do you think that text is an example of African American male theory, critical race theory, counter storytelling, funds of knowledge, fugitivity, or maroonage? Which one do you think fits best with this reading? And not just Ashley, anybody could answer. So, what may help you, right? Think about the thesis and think about the method of the text. That'll give you a good insight as to what the framework may be. Also, it's very possible that multiple frameworks fit within the reading. It's just really on how you articulate how it fits.
I think it's like critical race theory.
The counter storytelling?
Yeah.
Why would you say that, Wilmer?
Because I think the theory says that it kind of like opposes the focus on the narrative of dominant culture, and like it kind of shows like what their experience was, and kind of like both physically and mentally, and like kind of like how they lost themselves, and that's not something that's really talked about.
Yep, absolutely. That's perfect. Is there any other framework that somebody thought of that may have fit? Because it could be, it doesn't have to just be one. Nobody else? So to me, it could have been African American male theory, right? Because if you think about how he articulates their experience, and you think about how he talks about this notion of relation, it talks to this notion of self determination, right? And it talks about their capacity for morality and intelligence. So that's another one that you could have used. I do think that the counter storytelling was the best one. So Wilmer is right, but just again to show you that it doesn't have to be just one. We could have used African American male theory, and that could have been okay as well, right? So let's go to the next reading. We have a discourse on colonialism. Again, think about the method. It's a discourse, and think about the thesis, right? He's charging and he's critiquing this idea of colonialism. So would that be African American male theory? Would that be counter storytelling? Would that be funds of knowledge, fugitivity, or maroonage? Excuse me.
Maybe the counter storytelling,
Why, Ashley?
because since he's like critiquing it and he's like giving his own point of view, it's just like he's telling the story from a different perspective.
Yep. So he's not talking about, well, he's not talking about the colonizers in the way the colonizers are typically talked about, right? He's critiquing the colonizers. So that he's critiquing the colonizers from the perspective of the colonized. So you're absolutely right. Counter storytelling would be the best framework for this one. But again, it could also have been African American male theory because he's exhibiting his intelligence, he's exhibiting his morality, and he's exhibiting his self determination. These wouldn't really fit because you really don't see him. I mean, it would be a stretch to say he's passing this information down, and it's not really dealing with this notion of fugitivity or maroonage yet. Okay. Okay, then we have Gomez reversing Cell. Would that be counter storytelling, African American male theory, um, funds of knowledge, fugitivity, or maroonage?
I think if I remember, I think this one would be good for like three of them. I think it would be the first one, African American male theory,
Mm-hmm.
fugitivity, and perhaps maroonage as well. Because I think they even mention like
Yep.
the maroons in that one.
Yep.
But I think this one, like I would probably choose the first one as a focus because it kind of shows like how they weren't docile and like how they resisted, and it kind of goes against this idea that like Africans were docile to that.
Absolutely. Does anyone else want to add another one that you think could have fit for this reading? Think about how you normally hear about the enslavement experience, juxtaposed to how Gomez articulates that process. No? This could also be counter storytelling, right? Because to Wilmer's point, typically when they tell the story of enslaved Africans, they're told as docile, right? When you tell the stories of emancipation, it's like that was the end of the story. Now the slaves are free and everything is good, right? But Gomez, he tells a counter story to that reality. So you could see how there's a multitude of frameworks that could be used for each of these readings. Souls of Black folks, where would you categorize that? African American male theory, counter storytelling, funds of knowledge, maroonage or fugitivity. He's addressing the Negro problem. He talks about the veil. He talks about this notion of double consciousness. The title of the chapter is Of Our Spiritual Strivings. He lays out how African people sought to obtain their freedom through voting, through education, through politics, right?
I mean, the one that stands out to me is fugitivity, like their constant attempts to just, make something for themselves and be like they're trying to take back who they are.
Yeah.
The entire time.
Yep. And he articulates multiple versions of fugitivity, right? Trying to steal yourself from voting, right? Like using the vote to steal your freedom, right? That's a form of fugitivity that he articulates. Engaging in academic or intellectual exercises as a means to steal your liberation. That's a form of fugitivity. So absolutely, it can be read as fugitivity. Does anybody else want to try another one? Okay. And for our last one, with Douglas, would that be considered fugitivity? Would that be considered the counter narrative? Would that be considered maroonage, or would that be considered counter storytelling or African American male theory? We know this is somewhat of a debate, right? Or a counter speech given to someone else that gave a speech prior to his. We know that he's dealing with the interpretation of the Constitution. How would we situate this reading?
Is it counter storytelling?
Why? Why would it be counter storytelling?
Because I don't know.
I mean, you're not wrong, right? And I think what you guys really should pick up, it could be any of them. It's just really how you explain the way it fits within the framework. So yes, it could be counter storytelling because he's telling.
Because,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say because he like articulates what the Constitution is.
What it should be, right? Like he's
Yeah.
trying to tell the story of an ethical claim of what the Constitution should be, juxtaposed to how it's actually being played out, right? So that could be a way that it situates itself as counter storytelling. It could be really fugitivity is another good one, right? If you just think about Douglas himself and what he did, he literally is a fugitive that's on tour giving these speeches to explain how this enslavement state is inhumane. It could also be, yeah, I think those would probably be your best ones. Counter storytelling, African American male theory, and fugitivity would probably be the three best frameworks for this reading. So again, it's really about how you articulate the reading within the framework, right? And how can you make those fit? Any last questions about the midterm before I transition into the journal? Okay. So I'm going to pull up our Google Classroom site so we'll know how many journal entries we should be at. Give me 1 second. All right. This is our Google Classroom site. So for our readings, we had one. So this is one reading. And then let me know if there's a discrepancy with what I have versus what you guys have. So this is one. And then the Ma'at readings, 1, 2, 3. So that's 2 for this one. I don't believe I assigned this as a journal entry. This was additional material. So for weeks 1 through 3, we should have 2 readings. So we'll be at a total of 2. For weeks 4 through 7, we have Gomez. We have, we have Glissant. We have Gomez. We have Douglas. And then I don't remember if I said I'm assigning capitalism and slavery, because I know what was here was not what I covered in the lecture. So I know that I don't know if I said I'm going to hold you accountable for that for a journal, but let's just not. I won't hold that accountable. So we'll say 1, 2, 3. So that should be a total of 5. Does that sound about right for you guys? All right, and then we have Du Bois. We have Cesaire, and we have Garvey. So that would be 3 more. So that would bring us to a total of 8 journal entries. Does that sound about right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So we'll be looking for 8 journal entries for your first journal submission. Right here is the where you would submit the journal. The 14th of April. Right here is where you submit your midterm. I'll post the midterm and it'll be available for you guys on Friday. It'll be available here, and I'll also email it out to you guys, so you'll have that. So you'll have from Friday till I believe Wednesday of next week, which should be the 14th. But let me just double check. So
yeah, the 14th is Wednesday.
Wednesday, yeah. So you have from Friday to Wednesday. So it gives you ample time. Please do not wait till Wednesday. Don't wait till Tuesday. I give you guys that window to take advantage of it. If you wait to the last minute, it's going to make the midterm harder than what it's designed to be, right? And that's how you forget things like your theoretical framework, or you don't answer the questions completely. Any questions about the journal?
Yes. So sorry, I might have misheard you. You said that there were 8 journal entries. I counted 7.
Okay, let's go through them one more time. So we have the teachings of Ptahhotep. So that's 1. The Ma'at reading. That's 2. Glissant, Gomez, Douglas. So that's 5. I'm not going to count capitalism and slavery. My bad, I'll skip one. So we're at 5 so far. And then we have Du Bois, we have Cesaire, and Garvey. That'll be 3 more with the 8.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. Any other questions about the journals? So it's up to you guys. We could call it a day here, or I could give you an example question from another midterm just so you can have an idea of how the questions are framed.
I just had a question, Professor. The midterm is due on the 14th too.
Correct.
Okay.
Before 12 midnight.
Okay.
Professor, you said that you will give 5 questions and we can choose 3 from the 5, right?
Correct. Correct. But with the questions, Cecilia, like, so let's just say you have questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And you're going to choose questions 1, 3, and 5, right? But within question 1, there may be like 3 sub questions within that question. So if you think about the example that I gave at the start of class today, how old are African people? Was a significant individual prior to European contact? And why is that information important? Those are really 3 questions built within that one question. You guys with me on that? So
Yes.
you want to make sure you're answering every component of the question to get full credit. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, I'm wondering if we answer all 5 questions, can we get extra credit for it?
If you want to, I'll give it to you. You know, if you're feeling you're feeling overzealous, feel free. I'll give you the points for it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Oh, Professor, for the journal entries, was it fine if I did it like on paper? Because I noticed that like when you posted the journal submission, it said like electronically.
So, what you could do, Ashley, I mean, you could take a picture of them, but just make it so it's legible and I could read what you have. You know what I mean? So that way you don't have to type everything all over again. You could take a picture and submit it that way. That'll be fine. But you're gonna have to submit it somewhere where via this, this option here. And I don't, you won't be able to do that with your written work. So a picture would be okay.
And when will the midterm be open?
Friday. I'll have that posted for you guys Friday. And
okay.
It'll be available here, and then I'll also email it to you as well. So you have 2 ways of receiving that.
For the journal submissions, should we just have them all in a zip file, or?
That's cool. You could do a zip file. You could do like one big ass PDF, whatever is easiest for you.
Okay.
I don't know if you would be able to submit a zip file via here. I'm not sure. You have to double check that. But it could be Word, it could be Pages, it could be a PDF, whatever works best for you guys.
Yeah, because I have like multiple like Word documents, so I was like, oh, should I just like copy paste it all as one?
Yeah, I would do that, man. So that way you could just submit one document for me.
Okay.
And then, okay, let me pull up a midterm example. Give me 1 second. Let me find one of my other midterms. Okay, here we go. All right. So there's one there. That's the one I've been using as an example, though. So for you can use this first one here. How old are African people? There are 3 acceptable answers. You must also name an African individual prior to European contact and the significant contributions of this individual. In this essay, you should include why this information is important in the world of academia or in your personal development. So again, there's about 3 questions built in within this one question, right? So you would want to make sure that you're addressing each and every one of those. And then using, of course, a theoretical framework to work through that question. I know if you're looking at question number 2, Somé and Ngugi both articulate the role of language in shaping culture. What are the commonalities of their arguments as it pertains to language and culture? What are some of the differences? So you can see here, you would want to have to name some of the commonalities and some of the differences, right? And Ngugi articulates the cause of the problems in Africa. What is his stated cause, right? So how does Ngugi talk about the problems in Africa? And how does this articulation differ or complement Somme's articulation of alienation produced by modernity and the solution offered by Somme, right? So just really, really, really take your time and read the entire question. And that's why I say don't wait to the last minute, because if you wait to the last minute, it'll be really easy to read the first half of the question, answer that, and to think, boom, I'm finished, right? But you have to read carefully because I'm asking you multiple questions within one question. Here's one that kind of speaks to what you guys will be dealing with. What is the significance of the open boat as a metaphor and the use of the boat's pregnant belly? What is Glissant provoking readers to envision? What are the three metamorphoses of the abyss according to Glissant? And why is he so attentive to relations? So again, just be very careful about how you're reading what you're reading. Fatima, does that help you kind of make a little bit more sense of how the questions will be posed and phrased?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. How about everybody else?
Is there a word limit for answering those questions?
No, Cecilia, but especially if you're gonna do all five of them, just keep in mind I gotta read all that shit, so don't kill me. But no, there's no limit or there's no minimum, right? Like even if you are able to answer all of these questions within a sentence and use the theoretical framework, that's 100% response to me, right? Just in the same regard, though, you could write a paragraph for each portion of the question and then neglect the theoretical framework, and then you'll still miss the points. So it's kind of like the journals where I'm not looking for you to do it a specific way, but I'm just looking for you to have all the components of that journal intact. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, you guys? All right. So I have a question for you. Oh, does somebody have a question?
Yeah. When we turn these in, do you want our CIN attached to the paper or?
Nah, it should be cool because what I'm gonna do, Francisco, like when you submit it to Google Classroom, it lets me know who submits it, and I see it's you, and then I go back, I grade it, and then I give you your comments, and then I take that information, and I just transfer it to when it's time for grades to import it that way. So the CIN, it won't be necessary. Yeah, good question. Any other last questions? So I have a question for y'all then. How do you feel about the midterm now that we've gone through this midterm review? Anxious, nervous, apprehensive, prepared? How are you feeling?
I mean, I feel pretty good.
Yeah, I feel pretty good.
Okay, cool.
I mean, not many professors actually walk us through exactly how to answer the questions. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. To me, it's like why have an expectation, right, as a professor, but then don't make you guys aware of the expectation? That's stupid. Like, you know what I mean? I set you up for failure to do that. So I want to give you all the tools to be able to be successful. And then I also think about this, looking at the roster, there's a great portion of you who are freshmen. This is your first, time in college, etc., or your second semester. Taking that into account, I want to be able to instruct you on how to be successful when it comes to the rest of your educational career, right? So that's kind of the reason I do it the way that I do. Okay, and then the last thing that I'll say before we leave. So I don't want to assign readings for you guys and assign a midterm. So you won't have any readings, you won't have anything to watch. But when we come back that next week when we meet, what we'll be doing is going over our group projects. So I'll have some articles and some sections of the Constitution. You guys will pick which one you want to do, and then based on which article and section you pick will determine who's in your group. And I'll kind of explain what you will be doing in the for your final project. So we'll spend the day doing that, and then we'll pick up back as normal the week after that. Does that make sense for everybody? So the next time that we meet, once you turned in your midterm, it will be dedicated just to getting you guys in your groups for your group projects, explaining your group projects, and things of that nature. All right. Is there any last minute questions for me?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate for taking this course at this particularly period of time during the pandemic, and also see the division of our country. And also I want to say that I don't see this as the course anymore. I feel that this is something that give me courage and push me to think and read more to find out how we understand what happens right now. And I appreciate all those readings that you give to us, and put me in a deep thinking. I'm doing a lot of more research about those readings, and understand more about what race means to people. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Cecilia. You figured me out. You pulled my card, right? Like, if you pay attention to me closely, I don't really care about the course. It's not really what my concern is. My concern is what you just said, to get you guys to think about things differently, right? Because at the end of the day, yeah, you'll get your A, and you'll either go to grad school or you'll go get your job, and that A won't matter anymore. But what will matter is how you think about certain circumstances when you're faced with them, right? When you're in a circumstance where your job wants to devalue your cultural integrity, how will you stand in that moment? You know what I mean? Those are some of the things I really want you guys to start to think about, and want you guys to understand and get to. And to be honest with you, I take this job to be able to do that work, right? I'm not. That's why I tell you, I'm not a grades teacher. I'm not, and that's why you don't have a lot of assignments. I'm here to get you guys to think about things in a certain way and to be analytical and critical. So thank you for sharing that. It does make me feel good. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right. Don't stress, you guys. You'll be okay. You're prepared. I've sat in class with you and we discussed this material for some weeks now. I know that you're prepared. Just take my confidence when you take that test and know that you're prepared as well. But just give yourself the time to do the test. The worst thing that you could do is try to do this last minute. The way that this test is structured is for you to take your time with it, right? That's why I give you the amount of time that I give you. Even if you have to answer like a question a day, you have the time to do that, right? But it's not going to work like that if you're doing it at the last minute. If there's any comments, any questions, any concerns, you can email me, you could text me, and we can set up a Zoom or however we need to be. I'm going to reduce that limit though once the test is open on Friday, right? I'm not going to be answering like test questions once you have the test, right? Also, you have your peers to rely on, right? See what they think about things. You guys have been in classes together, you've been in breakout rooms together. Use them as resources as well. All right. Other than that, you guys, stay healthy, stay well, and I will see you next week. Peace.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye, Professor.
Thank you again.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Serena, you cool?